The laughter died before the band noticed why Dean had gone silent, mid-line, his glass lowered, his head tilted toward the front row, like he'd just heard a ghost. Look closely at what he saw. A young blind girl, maybe 10 years old, humming his song so softly that only someone standing on stage could have heard it, and she had no idea the entire show had just stopped for her. The room held its breath. 5,000 people leaning forward in velvet seats and pressed against bar rails, trying to figure out what Dean Martin was staring at. The spotlight hadn't moved. The band hadn't stopped yet. The pianist's left hand still rolled through the chord changes. The bassist plucked 2 more notes before his fingers went still. But Dean's microphone had drifted an inch away from his mouth, and his eyes, sharp and blue even under the amber stage wash, had locked onto someone no one else had noticed. Write in the comments, where are you listening to this story from? And what time is it right now? She sat 3 rows back, center section, her hands folded in her lap, a navy blue dress with white collar, dark glasses, the kind you see in old photographs of people who never got to choose whether the world saw them or not. Her mother sat beside her, one hand resting on the girl's shoulder, the other clutching a small purse like it was the only steady thing left in the building. The girl's lips moved, barely just enough to let a sound escape, a hum, soft and clear and heartbreakingly accurate, hitting every note Dean had just sung like she'd been rehearsing with him for weeks. Dean set his glass down on the piano. No one in the front rows had ever seen him do that mid-performance. The glass caught the light, amber liquid trembling in a perfect circle as it settled. He took 1 step forward, then stopped. His hand came up, palm flat, signaling the band without looking back. The drummer caught it first, sticks frozen mid-air, then the horn section, then the bassist who glanced at the pianist, and the pianist who glanced at Dean, and Dean, who never took his eyes off the girl in the front row. The silence that followed wasn't the kind you get when a song ends. It was the kind you get when something's about to start, and no one knows what it is yet. Dean had walked into the Sands Hotel showroom 6 hours earlier, his tie loose, his jacket slung over one shoulder, a cigarette unlit between his fingers. The stage crew was testing lights. Someone was sweeping the aisles. The smell of cleaning solution and old carpet mixed with the faint ghost of last night's perfume and bourbon. "Dino, we got a request," the stage manager said, walking up with a folded piece of paper. Dean didn't look up. He was watching the spotlight operator adjust the angle on the main beam, the light cutting through the dim room in a sharp white cone. What kind of request? "Kid wants to come tonight. Special case. She's blind." Dean turned then, one eyebrow raised, the cigarette now behind his ear. "So her mother wrote in. Says the girl knows every song, every word. She listens to your records on repeat. Thought maybe we'd save her a front row seat." Dean took the paper, unfolded it, scanned the handwriting, neat, careful, the kind of script that takes extra time, because the person writing it knows how much the words matter. He folded it again, handed it back. "Give her the seat, 3rd row center, and don't tell her. I know she's coming." The stage manager nodded. "You got it." Dean turned back toward the stage, hands in his pockets, shoulders relaxed in that way that made everything look easy even when it wasn't. And make sure the sound's good in that section. No dead spots. That was the last he'd said about it. Until now. Until the moment she hummed. Here's what you need to notice. Dean didn't freeze because the girl was blind. He froze because her hum matched the melody so perfectly that for one disorienting second, he thought he'd heard his own voice coming from somewhere else, like an echo that arrived before the original sound, like the room had split in 2. The girl didn't know the song had stopped. She kept humming, soft and steady, her head tilted slightly to the left the way people do when they're listening to something only they can hear. Her mother's hand tightened on her shoulder, not pulling her back, just grounding her, the way you'd hold onto something precious in a crowded room. Dean's jaw tightened, not in anger, in something older than that. Something that sits in your chest and makes it hard to breathe, for reasons you can't explain to anyone, not even yourself. He took another step forward. The stage floor creaked under his weight, one board, old and worn, letting out a soft groan that the front row heard, but the balcony didn't. The girl's hum faltered, just for a beat, and then continued, softer now. The bandleader, a man named Soul, with 40 years of stage experience and an instinct for trouble, leaned toward the horn section and whispered, "Stay ready, don't pack up yet." He didn't know what was coming, but he knew Dean's face, and Dean's face said this wasn't over. In the balcony, a woman leaned over to her husband and whispered, "What's he doing?" Her husband shook his head. "I don't know, but don't look away." In the lighting booth, the operator's hand hovered over the dimmer board, unsure whether to follow Dean or let him walk into shadow. The spotlight beam wobbled slightly, a shaft of gold cutting through cigarette smoke and the haze of 1,000 perfumes mingling with sweat and hope. Dean stopped at the edge of the stage. So she hummed, and Dean listened. 2 months earlier, the girl's mother had called the Sands Hotel from a payphone in a grocery store parking lot. She'd saved quarters for a week, practiced what she'd say, written it down on the back of a grocery receipt so she wouldn't forget. "My daughter," she'd said. When someone finally picked up, "She's 10 years old, and she's blind, and she knows every Dean Martin song by heart." I don't know if he'd care, but I thought, maybe if there was a way. The receptionist had transferred her 3 times. She'd talked to an assistant, then another assistant, then someone who said he'd pass the message along, in a tone that meant he wouldn't. She'd hung up feeling foolish, the quarters clinking back into the coin return, her daughter waiting in the car with her hands folded, humming "That's Amore" to herself. But someone had passed it along, and someone else had written it down, and it had ended up on a folded piece of paper in Dean Martin's hand, 6 hours before showtime, and he'd read it twice before handing it back. "Third row center," he'd said, "and make sure the sound's good." The girl didn't know any of this. She only knew her mother had told her they were going to see Dean Martin, and she'd spent the entire car ride humming every song she could remember, testing herself, making sure she wouldn't forget a single word. "Wait until you hear what he did next." Dean knelt down, right there at the edge of the stage, one knee on the polished wood, his hand braced against the floor to keep his balance. The front row gasped, not loud, just a collective intake of breath, the kind you hear in a theater when something impossible happens and everyone realizes it at the same time. The girl's hum stopped. Her head turned slightly, like she was trying to place a sound she couldn't identify. Her mother whispered something. Dean couldn't hear it, but he saw her lips move, and the girl nodded once, her hands still folded, her back straight in that careful, practiced posture of someone who's been taught to sit still in public. Dean's microphone hung from his hand, the cord trailing behind him like a tail. He didn't lift it, he just spoke, his voice low and direct, the kind of voice that doesn't carry past the first few rows but doesn't need to. "Hey, sweetheart, you know this song." The girl's lips parted. She didn't answer right away. Her mother's hand squeezed her shoulder gently, a silent permission, and the girl nodded. "Yes, sir. You got a good voice," Dean said. "I heard you humming. Sounded better than mine." A ripple of laughter from the crowd, soft, careful, like they were afraid to break whatever was happening. The girl's cheeks flushed pink. "I don't think so." "I do," Dean said. "And I've been doing this a long time, so I'm gonna trust my ears over yours on this one." Another ripple, louder now, the balcony leaning in, the bar section craning their necks, the lighting operator finally making a decision, narrowing the spotlight so it framed Dean and the girl and no one else, cutting the rest of the room into soft shadow. The air changed. You could feel it if you were there. A tightness in your chest, like the building had inhaled and wasn't ready to exhale yet. The stage lights dimmed slightly, just enough that the amber wash turned darker, richer, the color of honey left in a cabinet for years. The smoke from 100 cigarettes hung in the spotlight beam, swirling lazy and thick, particles catching the light like dust in a church. Dean's hand came up to the girl's mother. "You mind if she joins me up here for a minute?" The mother's eyes went wide. She looked at her daughter, then back at Dean, then at the stage, then at the 5,000 people watching, then back at her daughter. Her mouth opened. No sound came out. She nodded. Dean stood, offered his hand to the girl. The mother guided her daughter's hand toward his, and when their fingers touched, Dean's warm and calloused from years of holding microphones, the girl's small and cold and trembling, something in the room cracked open. Dean helped the girl onto the stage. She climbed the steps carefully, one hand in his, the other reaching out for balance, her mother following close behind, one hand hovering near her daughter's back, in case she stumbled. Dean walked the girl to the center of the stage, the spotlight following them, and stopped right where he'd been standing when the song ended. He bent down slightly, eye level with her, even though she couldn't see him. "You nervous?" The girl nodded. "A little." "Good," Dean said. "Me too. Every time." "That's how you know it matters." He straightened, motioned for the band. Sol picked up his baton, raised it halfway, and waited. Dean turned back to the girl. "You know everybody loves somebody." The girl smiled. A real smile. The kind that changes a face completely. "It's my favorite." "Mine too," Dean said. "You want to sing it with me?" The crowd erupted. Not in applause, not yet, but in a low, collective murmur, a wave of sound that rolled through the room like distant thunder. The girl's smile faltered. Dean's hand touched her shoulder, just lightly, and the murmur died. "You don't have to, if you don't want to," Dean said quietly. "But I think you'd be great, and I promise, I won't let anything bad happen up here." The girl's mother stood at the edge of the stage, her hands clasped together, her face pale, her eyes wet. She nodded. The girl couldn't see it, but she felt it, somehow, maybe in the way the air shifted, maybe in the silence that had settled over the room, and she nodded too. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll try. Here's the part you'll remember." Dean handed her the microphone, not his. He reached back and took a second one from the sound tech, who'd sprinted from the wings with it. The girl's hands closed around it, her fingers too small to wrap all the way, and Dean's hand steadied hers, holding the base of the mic so it wouldn't slip. Sol raised his baton. The pianist played the intro, soft, slower than usual, giving the girl time to find the rhythm. The horn section came in gently, careful not to drown her out, and then Dean started singing. "Everybody loves somebody sometime." His voice, smooth and easy, like honey poured over gravel. The crowd went still. The girl stood beside him, the microphone shaking slightly in her hands, her lips pressed together, her breath coming fast and shallow. Dean's eyes never left her face. He sang the next line, then paused, leaving space, waiting. The girl's lips moved. No sound at first. Then soft and wavering, her voice joined his. "Everybody falls in love somehow." The room exploded. Not in noise, in feeling. You could see it in the way people's shoulders dropped, the way hands reached for other hands, the way a man in the balcony took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. The girl's voice, thin and fragile and so heartbreakingly pure, wove through Dean's like thread through fabric, holding it together, making it whole. Dean kept singing, his voice steady, never overpowering hers, just guiding her, matching her tempo, catching her when she wavered and pulling her back in. The band followed, soft and slow, every note measured, every pause respected. The girl's hands stopped shaking. Her voice grew stronger, and by the time they reached the chorus, she was singing like she'd been born to do it, like the stage was exactly where she was supposed to be. The girl had been 6 years old when she first heard "Everybody Loves Somebody." Her father had brought home a record player and a Dean Martin album from a yard sale. Her father had put the record on, the needle hissed, the music started, and the girl, sitting cross-legged on the carpet, her hands folded in her lap, had gone completely still. "You like it?" her father had asked. She'd nodded. "Can you play it again?" He'd played it 6 times that afternoon, then 6 more that evening. By the end of the week, she knew every word. By the end of the month, she was humming it in her sleep. Her father had passed away 2 years later. A heart attack in the grocery store parking lot, sudden and clean and cruel in its efficiency. The record player had stayed. The records had stayed. And the girl had kept singing. The spotlight tightened. Just Dean and the girl now. The rest of the stage fading into shadow. The band played on, invisible except for the glint of brass and the soft glow of the piano's lacquered lid. The crowd disappeared too, not gone, but blurred, a wall of shapes and breathing, and held breath. The girl's voice cracked on the second verse. Dean caught it, his hand moving to her shoulder, steadying her, and she recovered, her voice rising again, stronger now, more certain. Her face tilted up toward the lights she couldn't see, and for one impossible moment, it looked like she was watching something in the distance, something beautiful and unreachable. Dean's throat tightened. He kept singing, professional, controlled, but his hand on her shoulder trembled, just slightly, just enough that if you were close, if you knew what to look for, you'd see it. The song built toward its final chorus. The band swelled, the horns lifting, the drums coming in with a soft shuffle, the bass walking up the scale. Dean's voice opened up, filling the room, and the girl's voice rose with it, no longer fragile, no longer afraid, just pure and clear and impossibly right. The crowd knew what was coming. They'd heard this song 100 times, but they'd never heard it like this. They'd never heard it sung by a man who'd spent 40 years on stages like this one, and a blind girl who'd spent 4 years listening to his records in the dark. And they'd never felt the weight of those two voices together, the way they fit, the way they held each other up. Soul's baton moved in slow, deliberate strokes. The pianist's hands danced across the keys. The horn section breathed as one. And Dean and the girl sang the final line together, their voices blending, separating, blending again, until the last note hung in the air, like a question no one wanted to answer. The silence that followed lasted 3 full seconds, 3 seconds where no one moved, no one breathed, no one dared to break whatever had just happened. And then the room came apart. Remember this moment, because it changes everything. The applause started in the balcony, a single pair of hands clapping, slow and deliberate, and then another, and another, and then the entire balcony was on its feet, and the main floor followed, and the bar section, and the people standing in the back who'd been there since doors opened. The sound rolled through the room like a wave, crashing and building and crashing again, and it didn't stop. Dean's hand stayed on the girl's shoulder. She stood frozen, her head turning slightly, trying to understand what was happening, why the air had changed, why her mother was crying, why Dean's hand was shaking. "They're clapping for you," Dean said quietly, bending down so only she could hear. The girl's lips parted. "For me?" "For you," Dean said. "And they're not gonna stop until you take a bow." The girl's mother climbed onto the stage, her heels clicking against the wood, her face wet, her hands reaching for her daughter. Dean guided the girl's hand toward her mother's, and when they touched, the mother pulled her daughter close, wrapping her arms around her, and the applause grew louder. Dean stepped back, not far, just enough to give them space. He picked up his glass from the piano, raised it toward the crowd, and smiled. The kind of smile that doesn't mean everything's okay. The kind of smile that means everything hurts. And that's exactly why it matters. The girl's father had told her once, the week before he died, that music was the only thing in the world that could take you somewhere you'd never been and make you feel like you'd always lived there. She hadn't understood what he meant at the time. She just nodded and kept humming. She understood now. The applause began to fade. Not because people wanted it to, but because they could see Dean was about to say something, and they didn't want to miss it. The girl and her mother stood at the edge of the stage now, holding each other, and Dean walked back to the microphone at center stage, his glass still in his hand, his tie still crooked. He waited until the room was silent, completely silent, the kind of silence that makes your ears ring. "I've been doing this a long time," Dean said, his voice low and rough, like he'd been awake for 3 days straight. "And I've sung that song more times than I can count. But I've never—" He paused, looked at the girl, looked back at the crowd. "I've never heard it sung better than that." The crowd erupted again. Shorter this time, sharper. Dean raised his hand, and they quieted. "This young lady's name," Dean continued, turning to the girl's mother, "is Sarah, and her mother tells me she knows every song I've ever recorded, every word, every note, and she can't see a damn thing." He paused. "Let that sit. But she hears everything, better than most of us ever will." Someone in the balcony shouted, "We love you, Sarah." Others joined in, a wave of voices calling her name. Sarah's mother held her daughter tighter, and Sarah's face broke into a smile. Dean raised his glass. "To Sarah, and to everyone who knows that the best things in life, you don't see them, you feel them." He drank. The crowd roared. And Sarah, standing at the edge of the stage, with her mother's arms around her, tilted her head back toward the lights she couldn't see and smiled like she'd just discovered a secret the rest of the world had been keeping from her. Notice what happened when the lights came up. The stage lights brightened. The band stood. Sol set his baton down and started clapping, and the horn section joined him, and the pianist and the sound crew in the wings, and the lighting operator in the booth who'd been holding his breath for the last 5 minutes. Dean walked Sarah and her mother off stage. The crowd watched them go, still clapping, still calling Sarah's name. Dean stopped at the edge of the wings, bent down one more time, and whispered something in Sarah's ear. She nodded. Her mother mouthed, "Thank you," over and over, her hands shaking, her eyes red. Dean nodded once, straightened, and walked back on stage. The applause swelled again. He picked up his microphone, waited for the noise to die down, and said, "All right, that's a tough act to follow, but we're gonna try." The band launched into the next song. The crowd settled back into their seats. The bartenders started pouring drinks again. The room returned to what it had been before, loud and smoky, and full of people who'd paid good money to forget their problems for a few hours. But something had changed. You could feel it in the way people leaned toward each other during the quiet parts, in the way they listened harder. Dean sang for another hour. He told jokes, he drank, he flirted with the woman in the red dress in the 4th row. He did everything he always did. But his eyes kept drifting back to the spot where Sarah had stood. And once, just once, his voice caught on a word that shouldn't have been hard. After the show, Dean found Sarah and her mother in the lobby. They were waiting for a cab. Sarah's hand in her mother's, her dark glasses reflecting the casino lights beyond the glass doors. "Hey," Dean said, walking up, still in his stage clothes, his tie finally straight because someone backstage had fixed it between sets. Sarah's mother turned, her eyes going wide. "Dean," he said, "and I wanted to give you this." He held out a record. Not one from the merch table, one from his own collection, signed, the ink still wet, "For Sarah." so she doesn't have to keep playing the scratched one at home. Sarah's mother took it with trembling hands. How did you? Your letter, Dean said. You mentioned it. The record player your husband got her. He crouched down in front of Sarah. Your mom tells me your dad loved this music too. Sarah nodded. He played it every day. Then he had good taste, Dean said. And so do you. He stood, looked at Sarah's mother. You take care of her, and he looked back at Sarah. You keep singing. Don't let anyone tell you you can't. Sarah's mother started crying again. Dean nodded once, patted Sarah on the shoulder, and walked back through the casino toward the elevators, his hands in his pockets, his shoulders a little heavier than they'd been before. 3 months later, Dean was back at the Sands. In a different crowd, different set, same stage. He sang Everybody Loves Somebody in the second set, and when he got to the first chorus, he paused, just for a beat, and looked at the third row center, a businessman in a gray suit, talking to his wife, oblivious. Dean kept singing, but he heard it, soft and clear and impossible to forget. Sarah's voice in the silence between his own notes, the memory of a blind girl who'd sung better than anyone had a right to, and the way the room had held its breath like it was afraid to let her go. The song ended. The crowd applauded. Dean bowed. Dean stood alone at the edge of the stage and looked at that empty third-row seat. Thanks, kid, he said quietly. Too quiet for anyone to hear. But he said it anyway. The stage manager had asked him after the show, while Dean was packing up his dressing room, "You think she'll remember this?" Dean had looked at him. "She's blind, not stupid. Of course she'll remember." "No, I mean," the stage manager had gestured vaguely. "You think it'll matter? Long term?" Dean had folded his jacket over his arm, picked up his glass, and walked toward the door. He'd stopped in the doorway, looked back. "You ever hear a voice like that?" The stage manager had shaken his head. "Then yeah," Dean had said, "it'll matter." Years later, long after the Sands had closed, and the stages had gone dark, and Dean had moved on to other rooms and other crowds, someone asked him in an interview what his favorite performance had been. He'd thought about it, longer than you'd expect. Then he'd smiled, not the stage smile, the real one, and said, "There was this kid, blind girl, front row. She hummed better than I sang, and for about 4 minutes, I got to stand next to someone who understood music better than I ever will." The interviewer had waited for more. Dean had shrugged. "That's it. That's the one I remember." He'd paused, looked out the window, his voice dropping. "Most nights, you're just making noise. But some nights, you're making something people carry with them. And that kid, she reminded me what the difference sounds like." He'd lifted his glass. Empty. He'd set it down. "So yeah, that one." The room went quiet. The interviewer nodded. And somewhere, in a house with a second-hand record player and a stack of worn albums, a young woman with dark glasses sat by a window and hummed Everybody Loves Somebody to herself, the way she had every day since she was 6 years old. She couldn't see the world, but she could hear it, every note, every silence, every moment that mattered. And that night at the Sands, when Dean Martin had knelt down at the edge of the stage and handed her a microphone and let her sing, that was the moment she'd learned that the world could hear her too.